probably safe to say more Canadians are working from home right now than perhaps ever before, as companies try to minimize the spread of coronavirus. Being at home during work hours, I mean, it might sound idyllic to some, but working remotely, as it's called, can be tough. I mean, there are distractions. There's the isolation factor. So what do you do if working from home isn't working for you? Our Chase team has reached Dr. Adriana Wilson. She's a Halifax psychiatrist and an assistant professor at Dalhousie University. Let's get right to it, Dr. Wilson. There are some people, I've been coming into the newsroom, which is great because I want to keep people informed about this virus, and it's a responsibility, and we're all happy to do it. But for those who can be working at home in our newsroom, they are. And there are many other Canadians in the same boat. What's the hardest thing for them, do you think?
Well, I think there's a few different things. Isolation is one of the biggest things. Humans are wired to connect, and when we can't connect with each other in the ways that we normally do, then that can cause a lot of anxiety and distress, even depressive symptoms sometimes. And so that would probably be the biggest thing for most people. But then there's the issues that you mentioned, like distractibility and productivity issues as well.
Let's talk about the depression issue. I mean, right now, for many Canadians, it's new. Are they in their jammies, having their coffee, maybe checking on the kids every now and then because they're at home? What's depressing about that?
Well, for a lot of people, then the work kind of team that we work with, they end up being the biggest part of our social connection. And you have a different kind of relationship with peers than you do when you're in a parenting role, for instance. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of never really get to switch off if you're at work needing to manage all of your work things while simultaneously staying in your home role where you're also now needing to wear both hats at the same time and be a parent while you're also being an employee.
I know someone who's been working at home for years. He actually leaves his house, walks down to Yonge Street near my home, gets a coffee, and actually walks back to his office, which is his house. And he says that gives him sort of mental separation. Are there tips you have for keeping people in the work zone versus the home zone?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important piece. So one of the really difficult things when we're working from home is that it becomes really difficult to separate when we're in work mode and when we're not. And anything we can do to increase that separation, like the example you gave, is going to help. So a few examples would be making sure that you designate specific times and spaces that will be allocated for your work and stick to those. And particularly having things like a sign that says, you know, when you're working or when you're playing, when you're off duty, or having work clothes that you get dressed into, just like your colleague goes to the coffee shop. So you get dressed into your work clothes and you get changed out of them at the end of the day. These are all things that can signal to your brain that there's a time to be awake and alert and a time to be off and be able to downregulate. It's also really important to not make your workspace, your bedroom, if at all abilitable.
Yeah, I guess that would be really important. But let me ask you about the fridge factor. I mean, here, when I'm in the newsroom, I have clementines that I bring into studio. That's what I have. I have 3 clementines. I have 1 an hour. If I was at home, I'd be in the cookie jar. How do you stop that?
Yeah, well, that's tough, and that's especially tough right now because when we're stressed, then and we want to connect and we can't connect the way we usually do, then we will try to connect with whatever is available. And if that's food or social media or booze, then we will connect with whatever is available to us. And so it can become a lot harder to regulate our intake when it's so readily available. So again, creating a schedule and a structure around your work and treating it like work can help with that also. Pack a lunch, bring it with you. Although I would strongly recommend if you do have other people at home with you that when you're taking breaks, make sure you actually take those opportunities to socialize. And also if you're alone, if you're isolated and not working or not living with other people, then take your breaks and take that as an opportunity to socialize virtually. And ideally use video chat because as humans, we really like eye contact and we use a lot of nonverbal cues to communicate. So we're going to get more out of the interaction with more nonverbal feedback, basically.
And what signs would you suggest people who are working from home in this coronavirus outbreak should watch for and perhaps notice that something needs to be changed?
Yeah, so there's a number of things to look for. Sleep, either too much or too little, can be an indicator. As I mentioned earlier, eating too much or too little. And then not being able to switch off. So suddenly being really kind of obsessively focused with watching puppy memes on Pinterest, that can also become a sign that there's something that's not quite right. And if you do live with other people, or if you are in the habit of checking in with other people, then it can even be as subtle as we're not making eye contact as much, we're feeling more disconnected or out of sync with other people. Those can also be signs that something is just starting to not be okay. And then that rumination piece is also going to be an indicator.
One final question for you, Dr. Wilson, and that is that right now, nobody has answers to how long this will last. And probably the biggest question people want to know is, when does my life get back to normal? I've been asking that question. I don't know the answer. And you probably don't either. So how does one deal with the uncertainty as well? I'm wondering if that plays with your psyche.
Yeah, oh, it absolutely does. Think of it this way. If you're starving and you don't know when your next meal is coming, you will experience that period of starvation very differently than if you're starving and you know you're going to get a piece of bread in a week. And so when we don't know when the relief is coming, it actually amps up our threat response. And so one way to deal with that is to kind of arbitrarily set a deadline and say, I only need to do this for a month. I can do anything for a month. And then even though we don't know that it's going to be a month, it may be more, we don't know yet. But if you set it as this is my end date, and then if I need to rejig it a month, then I'll rejig it a month, and I'll rejig with all of the information about how it's gone in the previous month, about what's worked and what hasn't.
You know what? It's a fascinating story, and I'm really glad you were able to talk to us about it. I certainly hope our viewers got something out of it, and I thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. Have a great day.
You too. Dr. Adriana Wilson is a psychiatrist. We reached her in Halifax.